Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Ogden. I'm an editor with LaRouchePack.com. I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight with our first webcast of the year 2013. This is our regular Friday evening broadcast, and today is January 4th. Mr. LaRouche will be delivering opening remarks tonight as according to our usual format, and then following that we will be having questions posed by Jason Ross and Dennis Mason, who are both joining us here in the studio tonight. So I thank you all for joining us again, and I'm proud to give to you Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
Well, there's some things that have to be dealt with under these circumstances. And we have a certain amount of cooperative spirit among the members of Congress who have been, and others who've been congregated in this process. And now the time has come to be more helpful to them, now that many of them are trying to do something about these problems, and give some helpful hints, shall we say, as to what they should take into consideration. For example, we had a report in the Washington Post on a fraud perpetrated against the people of Greece recently, and in the sense of really starving them to death, by a fraud perpetrated by the European Union. This particular case, first of all, it was willful fraud. Maybe not on the part of everybody involved, but certainly the leading circles, because they knew what was going on. What they were doing was very simply is this. They were going, Bernanke style, into hyperinflation. Now, what does hyperinflation mean? It means that you're issuing money and without production. Therefore, what's happening is you're taking the income of people, and the income that they're receiving in the same dollar amounts is plummeting at an accelerating rate. And this is what is happening inside the United States. It's happening willfully in Europe, because people say, oh, we're surprised. But people are ordinarily competent recognize that this is a fraud. What's going on in the European Union is a complete fraud, and it involves the systematic and increasing rates of murder of Greek citizens, who were the victims of the fact that the hyperinflationary program, which is driven by both sides of the Atlantic, whether in the European Union or in the United States itself, what we're doing is we are cheapening the value of labor so that when people are getting the same amount of a currency in money, they're actually getting less all the time, because the extra money that's being printed has no content whatsoever. It's purely hyperinflationary game money, boardwalk money. And this is the character of the thing. The worst part about it is that the programs that are being pushed by people who don't think clearly on these matters is that money has no intrinsic value. That is, there's only one form of money that has intrinsic value: gold and silver, when used as that, because it's a fixed amount. It's something that can be used interchangeably with money, and therefore it has some. But if you limit yourself to the money available, even if it's good money, shall we say, in terms of gold and silver and the like, that doesn't solve your problem. Because the problem is that you've got to, you cannot use money, such as gold and silver, cannot drive growth in the economy. What drives growth in the economy is the use of the equivalent of paper money. And gold and silver as currency are simply a part of the whole process, because they have an intrinsic value. Gold and silver and currency in that form does have some kind of use, because you can always convert it into its use as a metal. Now, paper does not have much value and cannot be used in place of a metal. So what's the value of paper then? Well, the value of paper is what it represents as a commitment to credit. In other words, it's only the value committed to credit, which has any redeemable value. Now, most of that value is not just exchange. Most of that value has to be credit. That is, you are actually investing in increasing the productive powers of labor into the future. So when you issue credit in general, in terms of the general function of an economy, you have to be increasing your productivity in physical terms. And you use a currency like gold or silver as simply as a way of having some constant value that you reference to. And then you run the money system accordingly. But the actual gold and silver exchange is a tiny proportion, relatively, of the total amount of credit which is supported with the inclusion of that medium. In other words, that you're taking one, trying to fix something, and you're fixing a currency, for example, with gold and silver, or copper. You're using that simply as a way of setting a standard of comparison. Now, what you want, though, is you want to create credit, but that means you have to have credit. Generally, you can't go too far unless you are producing something. And you won't get far either unless you are increasing your productivity in terms of the kind of things you're producing, the productivity of the process, in terms of physical terms of work, in terms of the standard of living, in terms of physical terms of increase of the standard of living. So most people who study these matters in universities and schools and so forth, or accounting school, simply don't know what they're doing. Many accountants simply have no competence in economy because of the approach they're taking is an assumption which is not real. It doesn't correspond to reality. So therefore, we have a lot of problems. First of all, one thing that has to be made clear, that you're not going to have any recovery of the United States. You're going to have a collapse in very short order, because the entire transatlantic region in particular, that is Europe and North America, are on the verge of blowing into hyperinflation. And if Bernanke is not checked and not fired, or if everybody likes him and is not fired, we're going to go into hyperinflation in the United States, and you're going to find something like has been done in Greece, where you actually have mass murder is being perpetrated by the European Union in terms of Greece in particular. And this article was reported today in the Washington Post, which is a very unusually for the Washington Post, is quite competent. And therefore it does represent something which people should pay attention to. So therefore the purpose is to increase the physical productivity per capita and per square kilometer of territory of mankind. If you're not doing that, now there's another reference here. Take the question of life in general, all forms of life. Well, let's keep out of the water for the time being. Let's stick to landed forms of life. The two, they're somewhat different trends. But the general tendency in life is to increase the energy flux density of the species. In other words, the evolution of life, the normal healthy evolution of life, is based on increasing the energy flux density of each member of a species, and of evolving from inferior species to higher quality species, more powerful, more productive. And this also applies to nations. The object is you have to increase the energy flux density per capita and per unit of life in general. That is, in terms of technology. You have to go to higher and higher levels of technology constantly, just as living processes die out. Why? Because they remain inferior, relatively inferior. Higher forms of life emerge, higher energy flux density, and the equivalent in terms of performance. And these species will tend to live. Those which lay in the old way of fashioned way were going to die out. And that same humanity, however, is not an animal. We have animal bodies, but our behavior is not that of an animal. And therefore, humanity has an indefinite capability of expanding its productivity as no other living species known on this universe to us can do. And therefore the function of mankind is not to be that of an animal, not to be that of a cow, a pig, etc., but to be a creative personality which no other species of life has ever achieved, except by biological evolution and favorable conditions of that biological evolution. So now the problem we have now is the green policy is killing us. Because what's happening with the combination of the green policy and hyperinflation, which is what we're getting into now, the value of life, the value of itself, is being cheapened. We are actually coming to the approach where the Queen's policy, the Queen of England's policy, of reducing the world population from 7 billion people to approximately 1, which is her target. It makes sense. What will do that? If you continue to have an environmentalist movement, run it the way it's run now, you are going to quickly reduce the potential population density of the planet, human population density of the planet, down to about 1 billion from 7. That was the greatest holocaust that's ever been conceived against mankind. And the so-called environmentalist program, as it's being now, is the greatest threat to the existence of humanity that could ever exist. Because it's a built-in threat, which mankind built into itself. So we now got to the point we've got to solve these problems. And there's no reason we shouldn't be able to solve these problems. They're well understood by me and some other people in the world. What you need is higher energy flux density. Because, for example, you want to get to Mars, you need thermonuclear fusion. Thermonuclear fusion in order to be able to do it. If you want to go by mankind, don't take the slow boat to Mars. You won't make it. You might make it in one case or two, but you're not going to make it often. But thermonuclear fusion, controlled thermonuclear fusion, is the only means by which we could say, in 30 days, get from the moon to Mars. Well, first of all, to get from the moon to Mars, you've got to get to the moon. And that means you've got to have a base on the moon, which is a productive base for giving you the product of technology which is needed on the moon in order to build up the system which is going to carry you to Mars. But if you get to that point, now you can probably have in 30 days a fair chance on a good season, a good part of the cycle of the Mars-Earth cycle. You might get a good chance of getting there within 30 days. If you start to think about longer than 30 days, you're getting into trouble. And therefore we can do a lot of things with non-living processes, especially non-mankind processes. But what we can do with man is if we have the technology developed on Earth, we can do as we have been doing gradually as long as NASA existed, and even after that now. We can build up systems on Earth and with the moon. Probably moon will be a great help in this process. It's much cheaper and much quicker to go from the moon to Mars than it is from Earth to Mars. So we can progress with a lot of instruments which go beyond what curiosity represents. We can build those instruments. We can plant them on Mars. We can actually, by using, we don't talk to people on Mars. Their machines up there don't talk. They communicate nonetheless. They communicate in electronic modes. And we can use those systems, which are kind of sort of automated systems or quasi-automatic systems. We can use those systems to build up scanning from Mars as from Earth to Mars. We won't talk. We won't use human speech. We will use electronics. And we will create a system where we're going to try to have to find ways of dealing with this mass of threatening creatures out there. And we can do it by building a bridge of mutual function between Earth and Mars, including the moon. And most of this will be purely, shall we say, electronic. But we will control the process. We will translate what needs to be translated the way we have to. This designing of systems. We will design the systems which will enable us to extend man's brain, man's mind, into whatever task is needed to be done. And that should be our perspective. Now, to do that means we've got to increase the energy flux density per capita of mankind now greatly. If we do not do that, for example, we will not be able to defend Earth against asteroids. And if a big one comes by, it may be goodbye. So therefore, these measures and this change in policy has to occur. It has to occur on Earth also for many reasons. The greatest problem we have on Earth is the poor development of the conditions under which human beings live. We can solve that by increasing the energy flux density, as it's called. Everything in scientific work in terms of economy depends upon the concept of energy flux density. In other words, the greater intensity. We want to get to matter-antimatter reactions sooner or later. We want this higher density of capability. And what we're using is not the physical muscle of man. That plays a minor role, although, albeit lifting your finger even requires something. Huh? But it's because we can build systems of higher energy flux density. And only by doing that can we increase mankind's capability of dealing with the universe around us. And that's what we have to do. Now, the other side of that is goes right now. Here we have a situation where the Congress is being assembled again, hopefully no longer disassembled, or something should be disassembled, but not that in general. But we're going to have to increase the energy flux density of everything. Transportation, everything. Well, why not? That is our natural tendency as mankind. And therefore, we have to work out a system to do that. Now, the first step is to have an economic system, like a national economic system, a global economic system. And we have to build in the increase of energy flux density for all applications. In other words, what we're trying to do to compensate for man's lack of slowness in increasing his productivity, we can increase the productivity of the devices we design. And therefore we can translate that increase in power of mankind per capita, we can translate that into an improvement in the economy. So what we need to do is involve something else. What we have out there right now, if we do not do exactly what I have proposed we must do now, well, then this world, the nation especially, is going to go into a hyperinflation which will cause a high rate of mass deaths inside the United States soon. We see a warning of this in Greece. What happened in Greece? We see a warning of this in Spain, in Portugal, and elsewhere. It's coming on. So the Queen's desire to reduce the human population of this planet from 7 billion people to 1 is being realized now through the great help of people who insist on being stupid. All we have to do is use our ability to progress with scientific technologies. And in that case, we can meet these challenges. But the danger now is this. What we have is a hyperinflation. Now, what do you mean by hyperinflation? It means that the more debt you have, the more money you've printed, which is as debt. In other words, paper money goes out as debt. And you're increasing the debt without the means to repay. And therefore, the result is simply, since you're not increasing the value of the debt, you are therefore driving down the actual standard of living, standard of productivity, and everything else of the nation as a whole. So not shutting down, that is, not using Glass-Steagall first. Now, first on the list, everything else is secondary. Put it to one side, everything else. Because it only takes a couple of steps to get the thing in place, and then you can start to deal with the other things. But first, you must stop this hyperinflation. You have to eliminate it. And therefore, we have to immediately go to Glass-Steagall. And as I've said before, Glass-Steagall by itself will not work. What Glass-Steagall does is stops, prevents some evil from spreading. And you want to stop that evil because there's no sense struggling unless you're going to do it. But once you decide to stop that evil, then what do you go to? Well, you go to production. You go to improve production, increase employment, and so forth. And cancel, and just simply cancel, all gambling debts. Because the greatest amount of hyperinflation in the United States, as in Europe today, is essentially in the form of worthless gambling debts being pumped out at an accelerating rate, as in Europe today. We're right at the point now. The hyperinflation is already in progress. It's in progress in Europe. It's already in progress in the United States. If you don't, first of all, stop this hyperinflation, which means shutting down Bernanke. This guy's got to be shut down. He's a menace to humanity. He's a menace to the human species. Shut him down. Foreclose him. We can reorganize the institution and get rid of that garbage. But the first thing we have to do is that. First, Glass-Steagall. That will get rid of a lot of problems, including speculation, financial speculation. It's gambling. We don't, the United States government must not and will not pay gambling debts of anybody, even itself. So get rid of the gambling debts. And now let's get into production. Let's start to employ people in production. And let's stop this cheapening of the value of labor, because every inch of inflation is many inches of losses of the standard of life. And these are the things, among the things, that only a few leading points I'm putting here now, on which we must proceed immediately. Glass-Steagall first, adopted. What that does, gets rid of all the garbage, all the high financial gambling garbage, just gone. There's nobody's going to pay it. If they can't pay it for themselves, if they can't reform themselves and pay it off that way, too bad. We've got to save the nation, and we've got to save the world. And the United States is key to saving the world. We may have many faults, but we still have a United States with its Constitution. And that United States, with its Constitution, is one of the most important assets of humanity in the world today. We've got to keep that going. We've got to make the progress. And that's where we have to go now. That means we're going to have a credit system, which means we're going to give credit not over the barrelhead. Now, credit's contingent. Credit's contingent. You want this? You want to build this? Okay, we're for it. But you're going to have to repay in the future, not the present. You're not going to cash in on the present. You're going to incur a debt, which you're going to carry. You're going to support. You're going to be ingenious in fixing it when it needs fixing. And then you'll have a term of life where this debt will be paid off. How will it be paid off? Because you will plan to have it paid off. You will make the improvements and the actions which enable you to pay it off. You're going to figure out how many, and with the agreement of government, which is going to be supervising this thing, that we can do that. We can meet that debt in, say, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or say, NWAPA, 25 years. And that we can do. That's how a credit system works. It's something that you plan to do, which is going to pay off in the time that you specify for it, if you competently estimate how that can work. And that's where we want to go. So therefore we do that. Now we're going to have to do one other thing. If we create a credit system under which the availability of credit is provided through the government, through government control, and also this will include a private debt created in concert with the government, but as private debt. And we'll collaborate among these institutions in order to keep the economy growing. That's where we go. That's where we have to go. We can get there. I know a good deal about this, obviously. I've been at it for a long time, and therefore it stands there. But that's where we have to go. The first thing we have to do is we have to get a three-phase reform. Glass-Steagall, number one, because without Glass-Steagall you can't do anything else. It may not do much for you, except it'll save your head, your butt. It'll save your head and your life. Once you have that, now you are going to have to use on a credit system, just as John Quincy Adams did. The same thing. The same thing that was going on until it was shut down by Jackson, who was only a fool in this case. It was actually British interests who controlled Andrew Jackson and who raped the United States and bankrupted the U.S. economy. But we're going to not do that. We're going to get this thing going. And now once we set up the credit system to go with Glass-Steagall, and without a credit system, Glass-Steagall cannot do much, except save your butt, which may be of some value to you. But then we also have to have advances in technology on which investment is based. And that's where we have to go. Those three things are the first thing we have to do. Everything else, it comes afterward in priority, except the emergency for people living and things like that. But in general, those three measures, which are the triad of productivity, must be installed first. Once we have that in place, then we're able to incorporate other things that have to be done. So you want this done on Friday, on Saturday, Sunday, or Monday? Don't take too long. Get this done within less than a week, if you can. And you got to think in those terms. Because if you don't do it, what's coming down on you is an explosion of hyperinflation. And Bernanke is the guy who will do it. Bernanke can unleash, as it's being done in Europe today, Bernanke's foolishness, if it's allowed to continue, can blow this economy open, and there will be never any recovery. So that's what we've got to think about.